Since ancient times, the book of Revelation has been one of the most feared and debated prophecies in the Bible. It describes the appearance of four horsemen, each carrying a sign of destruction. These horsemen represent conquest, war, famine, and death, forces that would devastate the earth in a cataclysmic event. But what if I told you they might not just be figures from the past or the distant future? What if these horsemen are already among us, hiding behind the natural disasters, wars, and crises we witness on a daily basis? Look around you. The earth seems to be screaming. The oceans are rising, the forests are burning, the storms are intensifying, and millions of people are facing hunger, disease, and war. Coincidence? Or are these the signs of the beginning of the end? In this video, we'll explore the frightening parallel between the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the climate changes affecting our world today. Get ready, because what you're about to hear could change your view of the future. Let's start with the first horseman, on a white horse. He symbolizes conquest. In the book of Revelation, he is described as someone who appears with a bow, winning, and conquering. Many scholars interpret him as a representation of leaders who conquer through power, cunning, and sometimes manipulation. In the modern context, the Knight of Conquest can be seen as the unbridled advance of great powers in search of profit, control, and natural resources. It's the race for power, often masked as progress. Today, we see this conquest taking a different form: the domination of the environment. Companies and nations are exploiting forests, oceans, and fertile land at an unsustainable rate. The Amazon, known as the lung of the world, loses millions of hectares every year to meet global demand. Glaciers melt while new trade routes emerge in the Arctic. The quest for control and power is slowly destroying the basis of life on Earth. This conquest does not bring peace, as suggested by the white horse, but sets the stage for the arrival of the second horseman. And then comes the horseman of war, riding a red horse. He brings chaos, violence, and conflict. In Revelation, he is described as someone who will take peace from the earth. And what do we see today? Geopolitical conflicts, civil wars, and disputes over scarce resources. The growth of climate change exacerbates these tensions. When the climate becomes extreme, the soil dries out, the water disappears, and the struggle for survival takes shape. Think of the conflicts in the Middle East, a region where the lack of water has become a greater threat than weapons. Wars for control of rivers and dams break out in previously peaceful places. In sub-Saharan Africa, desertification has forced millions to migrate, generating disputes between communities. Now imagine a global scenario where climate change turns basic resources like water and food into bargaining chips. It's not hard to imagine a world where the horseman of war walks freely, leaving destruction in his wake. But the worst is yet to come. With environmental collapse and wars devastating entire nations, the third horseman makes his entrance. Riding a black horse, he brings famine. In Revelation, he carries a scale in his hand, symbolizing rationing and scarcity. Today, we are already seeing the signs of this. Climate change is affecting crops all over the world. Extreme droughts, floods, and storms destroy entire crops. The price of basic foodstuffs rises while supply decreases. According to the UN, more than 800 million people face hunger worldwide, and that number is only growing. Did you know that extreme weather events are linked to food crises? El Niño, a climatic phenomenon, causes droughts in some regions and floods in others. Wheat, rice, and corn crops, food that sustains billions of people, are threatened. But this isn't just a problem for the poorest countries. When supply dwindles, prices skyrocket globally, and even the richest nations feel the impact. Hunger, like the rider of the black horse, does not discriminate. It hits everyone, and only the most prepared can resist. And finally, the fourth horseman arrives. Riding a pale horse, he is death. His name is self-explanatory. He brings with him disease, plagues, and ultimate destruction. With climate change, new threats arise. Extreme heat favors the emergence of tropical diseases in places where they didn't exist before. Viruses, bacteria, and parasites find new homes as the ice melts and releases old pathogens. Remember the recent pandemic? It was a reminder of how quickly the world can collapse in the face of a global health crisis. In addition, air and water pollution increase the rates of respiratory diseases and cancer. Forest fires release tons of carbon and toxic particles into the air. Studies show that millions of deaths a year are directly linked to the impact of climate change on human health. The pale knight, death. doesn't have to wait any longer. It's already here, slowly marching across our planet. Now, given all this, the question remains, are the four horsemen of the apocalypse just a metaphor or a prophetic description of what is happening now? Conquest, war, famine, and death. All are linked to the collapse of the environment. But what else is to come? Are the signs described in the book of Revelation being fulfilled before our eyes? What does this mean for our future? Get ready, because what follows will bring up real and disturbing examples of recent disasters that are shaking the world. They may be much more than coincidences, perhaps the clearest signs that the beginning of the end has already begun. In recent years, the world has witnessed an alarming sequence of natural and social events that seem straight out of the pages of the apocalypse. These aren't just predictions or isolated signs. It's as if the four horsemen are riding again, bringing with them famine, war, plague, and death. The relationship between climate disasters and ancient prophecies has never seemed so obvious. The first horseman, who many associate with conquest or domination, is often interpreted as a symbol of false saviors or systems that promise peace but end up imposing oppression. Today, we live in a world where quick, stopgap solutions are sold as the only possible answers to the climate crisis. Empty promises of sustainability and emissions cuts are repeatedly announced, but pollution, deforestation, and the exploitation of natural resources continue. Who are the modern knights behind this domination? Global leaders? Corporations? Or something even deeper that we can't see? To understand the impact of this horseman, just look at the regions of the planet where solutions never arrive. While some countries talk about progress, entire communities face the misery imposed by climate disasters. Empty promises are like arrows that never hit their target. And then the second horseman appears, riding a red horse and bringing war with him. We cannot ignore the fact that natural resources are increasingly disputed, fueling tensions and conflicts on a global scale. What begins as a quiet struggle for water, arable land, and energy resources quickly turns violent. Today, indirect wars for control of territories are masked under political and ideological discourses. Entire countries are suffering the consequences. Syria, for example, experienced one of the most severe droughts in its history before the conflict that devastated the country. Climate change has intensified the suffering of farmers, creating a rural exodus that has contributed to social instability. Hunger and despair fueled the chaos, and the red horse of war marched mercilessly. And now we come to the third horseman, the one who rides the black horse and carries the scales of hunger. Climate change is drastically altering the conditions for global agriculture. Prolonged droughts, storms, and floods are destroying entire plantations, affecting food production and the supply of the most vulnerable populations. In 2022, the Horn of Africa faced a historic drought, with millions of people going hungry. Crop fields turned into dry, cracked deserts, while animals died from lack of water. It's famine spreading like a shadow, and we wonder, is this the fulfillment of prophecy? For the people living this reality, it's not an allegory, it's real life, cruel and unforgiving. The most frightening thing is that this famine is not just the result of natural disasters. It is also driven by social inequality, corruption, and economic systems that put profit before survival. While some accumulate wealth, millions lack the basics to eat. This is the scale of the black horse, which weighs the grain and distributes it unfairly. Finally, the fourth knight is the one who rides the pale horse, death. And there's no escaping this figure. Death arrives as a natural consequence of the other knights. Wars, famines, and plagues pave the way for it. And today, we can see its impact in the spread of diseases that are intensifying with climate change. With the melting of permafrost in the Arctic, scientists have discovered ancient viruses, frozen thousands of years ago, coming back to life. This invisible threat raises questions. Are we prepared to face new pandemics, potentially more lethal than anything we've ever experienced? The world has not forgotten the global impact of COVID-19, but perhaps this was just a warning, a small foretaste of what is yet to come. In parallel, outbreaks of diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and cholera are on the rise due to the expansion of hot and humid areas. The forced migration of millions of people due to climatic disasters creates agglomerations in precarious conditions, which become hotbeds of infections and epidemics. The pale horse plague spreads silently, but with frightening effectiveness. It's as if each of the four horsemen were acting simultaneously, as never before. We witness empty conquests, wars for resources, growing famines, and plagues that defy our resistance. And the question that echoes is there still time to prevent the worst? Get ready, because now we're going to dive even deeper into this terrifying reality. Let's reflect on how these signs directly affect us, not only as a society, but also in our spirituality and faith. The truth may be more uncomfortable than we realize. As the pieces of this apocalyptic scenario fall into place, we begin to see a frightening pattern. The cycle of destruction described in the book of Revelation is not a distant prophecy, but a reality that seems to be building before our eyes. Increasingly intense natural disasters, global pandemics, famines and wars paint a picture that for many, sounds like the echo of the Four Horsemen riding across the earth. But what does this mean for us? Humanity is at a critical point. Not only in the physical sense, with catastrophes ravaging the world, but also in the spiritual and moral sense. The question is not just whether we can prevent the imminent collapse, but whether we are ready to face it. Climate disasters are not just statistics or headlines, they are warnings. When an unprecedented heatwave sweeps across entire countries, leaving deaths and crops destroyed, it's hard not to think of the Hunger Horsemen. When record-breaking storms devastate cities in a matter of hours, we feel the weight of the horsemen of death. When pandemics break out unexpectedly, paralyzing the world, the plague horseman becomes almost tangible. And when tensions between nations rise, culminating in bloody conflicts, the horseman of war reveals himself. However, there is something even more disturbing: the human response to these events. In the midst of chaos, greed, indifference, and the quest for power intensify. Large corporations exploit environmental disasters for profit, governments become omissive or manipulate crises to gain control, and inequality grows dramatically. Those who are already suffering now suffer even more. It's as if, instead of seeking solutions, humanity is only accelerating its own downfall. But even in the face of all this, an important question arises: what is our role in this story? The book of Revelation is not only a warning of destruction, but also a call to reflection and action. The horsemen are symbols of consequences. Consequences of a world that has strayed from its connection with the Creator, a world that has chosen to follow the path of selfishness and disorder. The earth is groaning, the signs are everywhere, but many remain blind, denying the gravity of the moment. There is, however, a thread of hope. The book of Revelation also talks about redemption and a new beginning for those who are willing to listen and act. What can we do in the face of such a challenging scenario? First, we need to recognize the signs and prepare ourselves, both spiritually and morally. We cannot ignore reality or minimize the events around us. Knowledge and vigilance are the first defenses against deception and passivity. Secondly, we need to act responsibly. Every choice we make, no matter how small, has an impact on the world around us. Greed and destruction arise when humanity loses its sense of collective responsibility and surrenders its morality in exchange for convenience. Can we reverse course? Perhaps not completely, but we can choose not to contribute to the chaos. Finally, and most importantly, we must turn our eyes to God. In times of uncertainty and despair, faith becomes the anchor that keeps us steady. No matter how bleak the circumstances may seem, there is hope for those who put their trust in the Creator. The prophecy of Revelation was not written to frighten us, but to warn and guide us. It is a reminder that evil, however triumphant it may seem, will not have the final word. The Four Horsemen represent the end of a world that has turned away from the light and embraced darkness. But at the same time, they are a call for us to wake up while there is still time. Every disaster, every sign, is an echo that calls out, "Get ready." Not just physically, but spiritually. Not just to survive, but to be part of the redemption. What do you see when you look at the world today? Are we heading directly towards the fulfillment of these prophecies? And more importantly, what are you doing to prepare? This is the time to reflect. The story of the Four Horsemen and climate change isn't just about the end of the world. It's about how we choose to live now. When chaos strikes, the only thing left will be our faith and the choices we've made. The apocalypse is not the end. It is the beginning of a new era for those who believe. The question is, which side will you be on? If you liked this video and believe that this message needs to be heard by more people, don't forget to share it. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow more stories that reveal the truths hidden in the prophecies. Tell us what you think. Are we living through the beginning of the end? Let's seek the truth together. God bless you and see you in the next video.